If you would like to see the full list, go to NFL.com/startsit to see this man's glorious work as we get set to give you some quarterbacks and running backs that you need to play or not. Sam Howell leading the league in passing yards right now per game. Are we starting?
I had Sam Howell as a sit last week. He did not throw a touchdown. He still managed to score 17 fantasy points. I don't know how he does it each week. You don't know how he does it each week, but every single week he comes through with at least 17 fantasy points. He's done so in 5 straight and in 8 of his last 9 games. Only CJ Stroud has more 300-yard games this year. He's running more. He's been running near the goal line as of late. So he just finds different ways to get you those fantasy points. And this week, against Tua, Tyreek Hill, and that high-powered Dolphins offense, he's going to have to put up plenty of points and throw the ball. Must-start option this week.
It's a sailboat because they were on the Del Rio, and they had to score a lot. Now they're not on there. We still think that Sam Howell is a start. What about Matthew Stafford? The Rams scored a bajillion points against the Cardinals. Are we starting Matt Stafford?
4 touchdowns last week. I'm not buying it, though. I am sitting Matthew Stafford. He's still, for the 6th straight game, threw for under 240 passing yards. Yeah, 4 touchdowns looks great. It was his only 2nd game this year with multiple passing touchdowns, and it came against the Arizona Cardinals. Let's be honest, that is a fantastic matchup. The Browns, yeah, they are not. They have allowed the fewest yards and touchdowns and the 3rd fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks this season. Even with all the buys, I think there's better streaming options out there than Matthew Stafford.
Yeah, dodging a good defense still makes so much sense. Then there's Trev. Trev got the win on the road against the Houston Texans. Are we starting him this week?
I called him out on this segment a couple weeks ago. I think he took it personally because he has been red hot as of late. 24 fantasy points a couple weeks ago, 32 last week. He's been running the ball more, 3 rushing touchdowns in that span, and that is huge for his fantasy value. Now he just gets a good matchup. The Bengals are in the top 10 in yards and fantasy points per game allowed to quarterbacks in the last month, and they have struggled against rushing quarterbacks, so Trevor Lawrence may be able to use his legs a bit more. Just like Michael Jordan, he took that personally.
He took that personally. He's sitting there, eyes looking a little jaundiced, talking about things he's gone through. And the reasons everybody else should be fearful of him. Let's talk about running backs. Joe Mixon, are we starting him?
Trevor Lawrence looks at the rest of the Jags. He's like, you guys just haven't won anything. We are sitting Joe Mixon this week. Oh, there we go. He is a sit. Look, I know last week he was one of 2 Bengals with over 30 yards, but yeah, that's pretty bad to be one of 2 players with over 30 yards on your team. 8 carries for 16 yards on the ground, his fewest rushing yards in a game since the middle of 2019. The Jaguars have allowed the fewest rushing yards to running backs, and they've allowed just 2 rushing touchdowns all year and none since week 7. So I understand with the buys, maybe some of you can't get away, but if you have options, this is a week to avoid Joe Mixon.
Yeah, just issues on offense in a rough year for Cincinnati. It seems like the Pittsburgh Steelers have turned things around. Najee had a nice game. Jalen Warren had a nice game a few weeks ago. Are we starting Jalen Warren?
Yeah, I'm still rolling with Jalen Warren. I know it was frustrating, the fantasy production he got compared to what Najee Harris gave you last week, but don't overlook the fact that in the last month, he is the RB4, and the Cardinals since week 8 have allowed the most rushing yards and touchdowns to running back. They also on the year allowed the 2nd most fantasy points. This is a week where the Steelers should be able to just run the ball all over this Cardinals defense. I think you comfortably start both Najee Harris and Jalen Warren given all the buys that we're dealing with.
Steelers offense coming a long way, especially in dealing with the buys. That does help. Devin Singletary making his way into the starts and sits, kind of putting Dameon Pierce in the rear view. Are we starting him this week?
I called him on Mr. Single Digits earlier this year, and he has made me look foolish. We are starting Devin Singletary. 81% of the snaps last week, 6 carries, but that was more than what Dameon Pierce had, and he dominated pass game volume. And the Broncos, we know, as good as their defense has been as of late, they still struggle against running backs. They allow the most rushing yards, most fantasy points per game. They struggle against pass catching backs. Volume alone makes Devin Singletary a start this week, but there is a lot of upside in this matchup and in this offense. I think you could just comfortably start him probably the rest of the way moving forward.
Yeah, a fun game with some sneaky fantasy stars in it. Looking forward to that one as well. You want to look forward to some more starts and sits. We got the wide receivers and tight ends coming up. Here's some more quarterbacks and running backs for you. Tua and Brock are both starts. Geno and Kenny Pickett going to the bench, though. In terms of running backs, Rashad White and Tony Pollard getting a start. A.J. Dillon and Chuba Hubbard performing their customary roles late this season and are going on the bench. Start sit. You can see the full list of Florio starts and sits for week 13. But let's get to some wide receivers as well as some tight ends. And we'll start with one DK Metcalf. Are we starting DK on Thursday Night Football?
I've written this article for a couple years now. This is the first time I've ever said to sit DK Metcalf. And there's a lot of reasons. One, the Cowboys have allowed just the third fewest yards to wide receivers. They're very good at wide receivers, but they use man coverage at the third highest rate in the league. DK Metcalf has a 30% catch rate this year and a terrible passer rating when targeted against man coverage. Bland is the #1 rated cover corner in the league. Geno Smith, his numbers are brutal when he's under pressure this year. The Cowboys generate pressure at the highest rate. There are so many reasons to get away from your Seahawks receivers this week. Go read the article for all the numbers. But yeah, it is pretty bleak for your Seahawks pass catchers this week.
Yeah, if the route is outbreaking and it's less than 10 yards away from the line of scrimmage and you see 26 playing for Dallas, leave it alone.
Just don't throw it.
Otherwise, you just go ahead and start chasing them at this point. Calvin Ridley, back-to-back games. So he's averaged like 26 points over his last 2 games. Are we starting Calvin?
I'm riding with the hot hand. And I will admit, I was a little skeptical about the Zay Jones narrative, but it's getting kind of hard to ignore. Over 20 fantasy points per game with Zay Jones. He has never reached 15, and he's averaging less than 8 per game without him out there. The Bengals, they've allowed the 5th most yards to receivers over the last month, and Calvin Ridley last week had 0 fantasy points at halftime. He scored over 21. That is how quickly he could put up points in chunks, and that's why even in a game where maybe the Jags don't have to throw as much, I think you could still start Calvin Ridley.
All right, it's faith despite the circumstances for Calvin Ridley, but a lot of folks saw Drake London getting some targets last week, and they're trying to make this decision. What decisions should they make, Mike?
I know with 6 teams on bye, it would seem like, yeah, we got to play Drake London, but I think you should sit him this week. Like, Arthur Smith is going to look at this game against the Jets and be like, they've allowed the 3rd most yards to running backs over the last month, but they have the best secondary in football. They can't score a whole lot of points. You don't want to give their elite secondary the opportunity to make a play. So I think the Falcons are going to run the ball as much as they possibly can. So there's volume concerns there already. Plus, Drake London operates primarily out wide and more on the left side. That's Sauce Gardner territory, DJ Reed. Just a whole bunch of reasons I think you should sit Drake London.
All right, sitting Drake London, but also shout out to our boy Nick in London. Drake London scored in London. That was fun. Let's get to some tight ends. Evan Ingram. We just talked about Calvin Ridley in the Jags. He's a start. Are we also starting the Jags tight end?
Yeah, we are starting Evan Ingram partially because buys and any tight end that gets consistent volume is worth starting this week. And he has 7 or more targets in all but 1 game since week 2, 9 or more fantasy points in all but 3 games this season. So he brings us a floor volume-wise and fantasy point-wise. But the Bengals, they've allowed the 2nd most fantasy points and yards to tight ends this season. So even in a game where you don't know if the Jags are going to have to throw as much because of how many points the Bengals can put up, I think you could start Evan Ingram with confidence.
All right, we're starting Evan Ingram for the Jags. We sat Matthew Stafford earlier in the show. Tyler Higbee had those scores against the Cardinals. Are we sitting him as well?
2 touchdowns last week. I am not buying it, though. He still was held under 30 yards. He has not yet reached 50 in a game this season. He does not have a touchdown in any other game this year, and the Browns have allowed by far the fewest yards to tight ends. Mark Andrews, the only tight end to get over 8 fantasy points against them, even with buys being what they are. This is a trap. I would avoid Tyler Higbee this week.
Hey, you know, is another tight end who wears 89 and plays for a Los Angeles team and has no yards but somehow catches touchdowns? It's Donald Parham. Basically the same player.
They're the pointing Spider-Man gift.
It's Tyler Higbee. Trey McBride, are we starting the rookie phenom for Arizona?
Do you like fantasy points?
I love them.
Then we're starting Trey McBride.
Hey!
I think he is a must-start fantasy tight end the rest of the way. 3rd in targets and catches among tight ends since week 7. 2nd amongst fantasy points since week 8. Last week, down game with Kyler Murray, 9 fantasy points. That's been the floor. That is a super safe floor when we were talking about tight ends. Twice he's top 21. He is a must-start tight end the rest of the way. If you picked him up off the waiver wire, rejoice, because many people in your league would love to have Trey McBride on their roster right now.
Absolutely a smash start. And yes, dynasty managers, you drafted him when he was 14 years old. We understand. We understand. And how about this more? Wide receivers and tight end. Rashee Rice and Michael Pittman Jr. all starts, as is the machine known as Taysom Hill. Dalton Schultz also will start. Godwin Cooper, Logan Thomas, and Gerald Everett on the bench.